The desert wind carried the investigator's breath in visible white frost as he leaned over the sand-coated evidence bag, its contents finally revealed after decades of silence. A cheap silver locket, engraved with initials nearly erased by time, unearthed beneath a shifting dune that had hidden more than just dust and memory. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. The discovery itself did not come during a dramatic excavator dig or televised search, but in a quiet December inspection, when the Texas winter, unusually cold that year, hardened the desert floor outside El Paso. It was December 19, 1988, when 22-year-old college student Michelle Alvarez disappeared without creating a headline. She had been home from the University of Texas at Austin for Christmas break, visiting her parents on the east side of the city, wrapping donated toys at a community drop-off, and preparing to attend a nativity choir event near downtown. Her absence was first explained by late holiday errands, then a missed church gathering, then a phone that continued to ring unanswered. By Christmas Eve, the Alvarez home was no longer decorated in quiet seasonal lights, but in red and blue patrol beams reflecting against tinsel-wrapped windows. The story of her disappearance exists not in dramatic retellings, but in thin, yellowed case notes, and a stack of flyers that showed her smiling in a red sweater and snowflake earrings. El Paso in 1988 was quieter than its border reputation suggested. Holiday tourism, downtown lights, cross-border trade shoppers, and families preparing tamales before Christmas Eve Mass created a seasonal calm. That calm made Michelle's vanishing stand out in sharp contrast. She had last been seen in her family sedan, a used beige Oldsmobile, leaving the church parking lot. The next known trace was not until dawn on December 20, when the vehicle was found abandoned 10 miles outside the city limits, angled off a highway service road that stretched toward New Mexico like an unbroken arrow disappearing into the desert. There were no broken windows, no tire tracks suggesting a chase, no signs of desperation. The Oldsmobile had simply rolled gently, as if guided by unseen momentum, into a ditch. Inside, officers found her purse, her gloves, and in the backseat Christmas wrapping paper she had purchased for donation gifts. The air smelled only of dust and old upholstery. The missing posters went up by midday, and local newspapers, still focused on holiday church schedules and weather predictions, shifted tone to concern. Michelle's age mattered. At 22, she was not rebellious, transient, or disconnected, the categories law enforcement sometimes used to soften urgency. She was organized, academic, rooted, and planning graduate school after spring semester. The initial search widened quietly but persistently. Sheriff deputies on horseback traced canyons carved by winter wind. Volunteers, some wearing Santa hats from earlier charity events, combed brush and yucca without camera crews or loud interviews. Forensic technicians, then working with limited databases and pre-DNA national linkage systems, collected what little the Oldsmobile offered. On the passenger seat, officers found a thin layer of desert particulate, unusually heavy for a single night of wind exposure, hinting she had been near active dig terrain before her car was abandoned. Still, in 1988, microscopic soil composition analysis was a tool reserved for larger federal cases. Christmas passed with silent dinners in the Alvarez home. New Year's Eve arrived with televised celebrations that the family muted. Michelle's photograph remained on local station rotation for weeks, then months. By February, the investigation thinned, not by negligence but by the limits of a smaller city department. El Paso could not sustain the manpower required for indefinite search operations in desert terrain that stretched beyond predictable limits. The case file narrowed to witness log sheets, gas station receipt collections, and a few faint sightings that suggested uncertainty rather than evidence. It was not until Thanksgiving 1989, nearly a full year later and again during the holiday season, that a hunter reported finding a weathered shoe near a remote trail west of the Franklin Mountains. The area had been wind-scoured repeatedly, and shifting soil had migrated more than a mile from original surface position. The shoe was tagged, bagged, and stored, its leather separating delicately under laboratory handling. Near it was a fragment of chain, no locket, no identifying metal, only a partial clasp. No full remains, no conclusive trace. The report did not make front-page news. It did not even merit extended airtime. Holiday parades commanded greater civic space. The Alvarez family continued searching, privately posting updated flyers that faded under sun exposure. By Christmas 1990, the case file was moved into the department's cold storage archive. Officers transferred precincts, retirement announcements came and went, and El Paso expanded outward in suburban growth. What had been open brushland in 1988 became convenience store parking lots and new lane additions on I-10. Through it all, the desert preserved what the city outgrew. The real shift did not occur from fresh discovery, but through evolving forensic technology. By 2005, cold case units across the nation began reviewing old evidence catalogs, rechecking storage containers, and requesting renewed testing authority. Michelle's file, marked in fading blue ink, was reactivated. The shoe fragment and chain clasp returned to laboratory benches, this time under digital microscopy and upgraded trace analysis. Soil samples from the Oldsmobile's floor mats, once dismissed as generic desert dust, now revealed a more specific composition. Gypsum-rich sediment, matching excavation zones used in late 1980's pipeline expansions north of El Paso. These zones had been active during December 1988, meaning Michelle had likely been taken, or at least transported, near temporary worker sites. This narrowed attention towards seasonal labor rosters and subcontractor documentation that had never been pulled in the original investigation. Among them were short-term hires, many without full residential records, working pre-Christmas shift reductions. From the lists emerged one name that aligned with a previously overlooked interview sheet: a maintenance driver with a minor theft charge, who had left El Paso abruptly after New Year's 1989. His file contained no violent indicators, no known predatory pattern, only job instability and frequent relocations. Before investigators could reestablish contact, that individual had already died in 1999 from natural causes while living in Nevada. Without confession, physical evidence became paramount. The chain clasp, when re-examined under improved metal degradation mapping, showed wear consistent with sand abrasion, but also microscopic paint transfer not from holiday crafts, but from industrial equipment surfaces used in pipeline yards. That paint compound matched one particular company contracted during the exact week Michelle vanished. On December 23, 2006, nearly 18 years after the disappearance, law enforcement investigators received permission to conduct an expanded dig near a former equipment staging area. Winter winds had reshaped dunes repeatedly. Excavation required precision, not spectacle. Within 3 days, bone fragments emerged, human, young adult, and consistent with female dimensions. The location aligned with the previously analyzed soil particulate. Nearby, beneath layered sand, lay the silver locket recovered later, preserved in enough form to allow engraving analysis. The engraving had faded, but sequence alignment matched the Alvarez family's jewelry records. Autopsy reconstruction, though limited by time and environmental exposure, concluded no evidence of prolonged suffering, suggesting a rapid event, though exact cause remained unconfirmed due to skeletal reduction. The family received notification privately, without press conferences or broadcast coverage. A quiet funeral service held on a crisp January morning in 2007 closed a decade and a half of uncertainty. Yet the full legal outcome awaited one more step. The pipeline subcontractors' archived employment files contained timesheets and vehicle logs indicating the maintenance driver had been assigned to perimeter sweep routes the exact hour Michelle's car left the church parking lot. December 19, 1988, 9:17 p.m. he logged a return timestamp 11:04 p.m., the same window during which the Oldsmobile was found to have traveled beyond city limits before being left in the ditch. Corroborating this timing with soil trace and metal paint transfer allowed prosecutors to petition for formal archival closure in 2008. Though the maintenance driver could not be prosecuted due to death, the district attorney's office issued official determination attributed to single suspect involvement with no accomplices. The Alvarez family received the final report in a plain envelope, printed on letterhead, stamped with the cold case seal, marking legal resolution. But the story of evidence did not end there. In 2016, further analysis of soil migration patterns confirmed that shifting dunes had continuously buried and revealed the exact zone, explaining why searches missed remains in earlier years. The El Paso desert, silent and undisturbed, had both hidden and preserved the truth. The years following the official closure of the Alvarez case did not bring public documentaries, televised interviews, or anniversary coverage. Instead, the resolution existed in court binders and forensic archive labels, the way many late 1980s disappearances found eventual answers only after original investigators had retired. Yet the true investigative dimension extended beyond the primary suspect's association with the pipeline staging grounds. In the quiet corridors of El Paso's county building, additional casework review began in 2017, not due to doubt, but due to a statewide initiative examining long-term desert region disappearances. For Michelle's case, that meant re-evaluating all adjacent reports filed between Thanksgiving 1988 and New Year's 1989. The purpose was not to reopen her file, but to understand why her absence fit patterns that had not been visible 30 years earlier. During those years, El Paso experienced typical holiday shifts, seasonal workers, temporary federal contractors assigned to border infrastructure, and returning college populations. Michelle's timeline, balanced between family church obligations and charity work, intersected with a transient labor population at precisely the wrong moment. Investigators reviewing her route noticed something that earlier maps had not captured. A short detour on her drive home placed her near a fuel depot utilized by subcontracted industrial drivers. Though no direct interaction could be proven, the proximity was enough to align environmental trace evidence. Forensic soil specialists, now using geospatial layering software, created a predictive model showing dust transfer probability from pipeline yards to consumer vehicles. The model indicated that only vehicles passing within a specific corridor accumulated the distinctive gypsum-heavy particulate later found on Michelle's floor mats and glove compartment. The Oldsmobile could not have collected this amount solely from roadside conditions. It required direct exposure to an active site. This finding did not contradict the original conclusion. It simply added environmental precision to the record. It confirmed that Michelle had been moved, or at least that her vehicle had been relocated, toward equipment grounds north of the city before being redirected to the ditch. El Paso in the late 1980s was in a transitional development period. Subdivisions expanded while vast stretches of untouched sand remained, creating a landscape where human tracks could vanish in hours. Winter winds accelerated soil drift, burying tire imprints beneath moving ground. In December, temperature drops hardened top layers overnight, making morning search teams believe footprints and drag patterns had never existed. These conditions contributed significantly to why Michelle's case took nearly 2 decades to confirm remain placement. Mapping this terrain became part of the cold case review, demonstrating how weather cycles, not investigative oversight, obscured discovery. During the renewed analysis, investigators also performed a retrospective review of vehicle salvage logs connected to the subcontractor fleet. Industrial records indicated that in December 1988, the maintenance driver assigned to perimeter routes had returned his company vehicle for brake realignment 3 days after Michelle vanished. While this detail alone did not signify wrongdoing, the timing aligned with the period when Michelle's personal vehicle was abandoned on the service road. Brake system dust from the company truck, when compared to microscopic mechanical residue found on the Oldsmobile's upholstery, exhibited faint but measurable commonality. It did not meet courtroom evidentiary thresholds in 1988, but by modern trace standards, it deepened the understanding of event sequence. Local jurisdiction processes in the 1980s often compartmentalized missing person files, leaving departmental transitions vulnerable to information drift. But Michelle's parents remained consistent in their communication, delivering annual letters to the cold case unit each December. These were not pleas for media visibility, but requests for procedural clarity, asking whether new forensic technologies could illuminate overlooked fragments. When resolution finally arrived in 2007 and legal closure followed in 2008, the family requested no televised statements. They opted for a graveside memorial each Christmas season, placing a single candle and locket image rather than wreath displays. This quiet mourning reflected the tone of the original Disappearance. Understated, dignified, and woven into the holiday cadence El Paso continued to observe each winter. The cold case detectives assigned to the review program in 2017 documented Michelle's file as an instructive example of forensic delay rather than investigative error. They noted how pre-DNA decades required slower evidentiary interpretation, relying on manual soil comparison, visual fiber inspection, and analog witness interviews. Holiday staffing reductions meant that December disappearances often crossed into January processing periods, losing immediacy behind year-end reporting priorities. Michelle's case illustrated how environmental isolation around El Paso could extend resolution timelines despite consistent law enforcement effort. By the winter of 2020, archival historians began collecting solved cold case summaries for regional academic analysis. Michelle's entry was categorized under Southwest desert forensic conditions, specifically in relation to gypsum displacement, labor route witness scarcity, and seasonal migration flux. The notes described her as 22, home for Christmas, last seen in a church parking lot beneath holiday lights now long replaced by upgraded fixtures. The analysis observed how local newspapers had shifted tone only gradually, from initial missing person coverage to quiet annual notices, then finally to a respectful obituary after remains confirmation. The maintenance driver, identified as the singular suspect, remained an individual profile rather than a psychological study. His record showed no serial offenses, no multi-state patterns, no predatory tracking. Investigators concluded that the incident aligned with opportunistic proximity, facilitated by isolated terrain and unmonitored industrial access points at night. The reason Michelle's disappearance did not repeat in subsequent winters was not due to heightened enforcement, but due to closure of the temporary work yard immediately after pipeline completion. The post-site reclamation removed both the physical location and the occupational pathway that had intersected with Michelle's final movements. Modern case examiners emphasize the importance of environmental trace disciplines. When the locket emerged in its evidence bag decades later, it symbolized not narrative drama but forensic patience. Engraved metal becomes testimony when human memory fades, and the desert, indifferent to time, preserved enough fragments to allow final identification. In the absence of confessional words or living defendant testimony, closure relied on material science alone. For the Alvarez family, the resolution altered holiday rituals quietly. Lights were still hung each December, choir services still attended, tamale preparations still completed, but a candle always burned near a framed photograph of Michelle in her red sweater. No public message, no annual statement, only the acknowledgement that an answer, though delayed, had arrived with the same unhurried force as the winter wind that once buried her traces. The case now serves as reference material for training modules in Texas forensic seminars, focusing on environmental evidence preservation in arid climates. Students review her timeline not for dramatic tension, but for procedural discipline. The abandoned Oldsmobile, once a symbol of unanswered questions on a dark service road, became instead a measured map point in an extended investigative arc where December dust and seasonal quiet formed both barrier and record. Thus, El Paso continues its winter rhythms, border lights flickering across the Rio Grande, church bells marking Christmas Eve, and desert air settling across long highway lines. The story of Michelle Alvarez remains not in holiday folklore, but in quietly labeled archive drawers, sealed locket metal, and the recorded acknowledgement that even when the season is bright with celebration, some families move through December with memory rather than festivity guiding their steps. The next stage of analysis, conducted under the Texas Department of Public Safety Cold Case Oversight in 2021, sought not to reassign fault, but to create measurable context. In the decades since Michelle's disappearance, El Paso had expanded, with commercial districts and highway extensions layering over regions once silent on winter nights. Investigators, archivists, and forensic environmental specialists convened to record the historical landscape as it existed on December 19, 1988. Their objective was not emotional reconstruction but geographic truth. The church location, the fuel route, the pipeline yard, and the desert staging area had to be mapped against contemporary terrain to evaluate what earlier teams could not have visually tracked. Digital terrain relayering combined 1988 satellite imaging with modern topographical comparison. The result demonstrated exactly what case historians suspected. The zone where Michelle's locket was eventually recovered no longer resembled its former geography. Sand halls, road grading, and winter erosion had altered elevation by as much as 8 feet in some positions. What was once a narrow cut-in used for equipment storage had broadened into a wind-sculpted basin. When search crews combed the area in early 1989 and again in 1990, their grid lines bypassed the future excavation region by only a handful of meters. Without subsurface detection tools, and before digital plotting existed on departmental laptops, successful recovery had simply not been possible. It is difficult for contemporary forensic students to understand the manual nature of 1980s search design. In that era, gridding depended on string markers, compass calibration, and analog distance wheels. Air support, when requested, photographed terrain but could not generate three-dimensional soil migration renderings. Michelle's case, therefore, is archived as both a solved disappearance and a study in technological evolution. Nothing in the departmental review suggested neglect or miscalculation. Rather, it emphasized the precision gap that once existed between desert disappearance and digital confirmation. The locket itself, though modest, became the evidentiary anchor. When analyzed through spectral metallurgical enhancement, engravings once diminished by abrasion revealed microindentation patterns matching retailers from a specific downtown El Paso jeweler. The Alvarez family provided a purchase receipt dated December 1985, confirming it as a 19th birthday gift. The chain fragment recovered years earlier, initially unidentified, matched clasp manufacturing alignment used by the same store. While no single piece established cause, collectively, the items confirmed personal identity through traceable consumer history. In forensic records, this element matters deeply. Identification must be tied not only to biological remains, but to material possessions with verifiable provenance. Holiday atmospheres are rarely associated with archived evidence. Yet Michelle's case remained tied to December, not only because she disappeared 2 days before Christmas Eve, but because each procedural milestone occurred during the winter season. The discovery of her abandoned vehicle on December 20, the first shoe fragment located after Thanksgiving 1989, the return of the case in review during December 2005, and the excavation authorization granted on December 23, 2006, all aligned with end-of-year intervals. These were not symbolic markers. They reflected staffing patterns, weather cycles, and resource availability. Desert environments reveal their buried elements most effectively after seasonal wind cycles reach apex velocity, and that apex repeatedly occurred during December survey windows. By January 2022, a final educational report was drafted outlining the procedural sequence. It detailed the original missing person classification, the roadside recovery, the transitional cold storage period, and eventual reopening through evolving environmental forensics. The report avoided speculative narrative. It did not dramatize the event nor infer psychological motive. Instead, it established a factual chain: isolated industrial route access, unmonitored staging yard entry during late evening shift reductions, vehicle relocation, and delayed desert emergence over an 18-year burial cycle. Some cold cases generate public campaigns or advocacy legislation. Michelle's did not. It remained personal to her family, formal to law enforcement, and instructive to academic forensic review. The absence of sensational themes contributed to its clarity. There were no cryptic communications, no multiple suspects, no conflicting witness testimonies. Only one timeline, one location sequence, one environmental challenge, and one individual whose relocation across states prevented living interrogation. The maintenance driver's file underwent its final cross-state employment audit in spring 2022. It showed a pattern of temporary industrial contracts across Nevada, Arizona, and Texas, with no documented interpersonal misconduct. Traffic citations and workplace violations showed minimal escalation, equipment lateness, route deviation, and payroll discrepancies. These did not constitute violent predictors, but demonstrated irregular work behavior consistent with transient industrial personnel. No known victims preceded or followed Michelle, reinforcing investigators' conclusion that the event was situational, not cyclical. Legal historians reviewing the case noted its absence from national missing person registries of the era. Interstate tracking systems were not integrated in 1988, preventing immediate data sharing. The Alvarez case would today enter national platforms within hours, enabling cross-border verification and media distribution. In the late 1980s, local broadcast announcements and printed flyers constituted the entirety of public alert protocols. Thus, Michelle's photograph, reproduced on holiday season bulletin boards, gradually faded not due to indifference but material limitation. Paper exposed to desert sunlight loses pigment reliably within weeks. Many flyers required reprinting, but community focus shifted as New Year transitioned into spring semester routines. The church community where Michelle last attended December service maintained internal remembrance. Yearly choir rosters marked her absence with a small notation, not openly displayed but preserved within administrative records. Families continued Christmas rehearsals, candlelight services, and seasonal chorus performances, yet her name remained in internal listings for several years following resolution. Community memory often persists not in memorial plaques, but in attendance sheets stored in church office drawers. In reviewing the case for contemporary instruction, analysts emphasize detachment from narrative embellishment. The desert does not conceal to create mystery. It conceals because environmental systems move according to wind pressure, temperature gradient, and aeolian sediment transport. These forces acted uniformly and without intention on the terrain that held Michelle's remains. When forensic students view this case, they are reminded that disappearance in isolated landscapes requires patience measured not in days, but in seasons and decades. By winter 2023, the Alvarez family had completed all procedural verifications. Legal confirmation, chain of custody documentation, and archive certification were settled. They requested no commemorative broadcast, and the city complied. Their December gatherings resumed with quiet consistency. Holiday table arrangements reflected absence without requiring spoken acknowledgement. It is in this manner that many cold case families adapt, not through public closure statements, but through private seasonal continuity. Thus, 35 years after the night Michelle drove away beneath church lights and desert stars, the resolution remains recorded not in spectacle but in print, filing, topographic modeling, and material trace. The El Paso desert, chilled each December by winds carrying dust across highway lines, continues in silent rhythm. The restored record stands as both explanation and caution. Isolated terrain, temporary labor populations, and holiday dispersal schedules create conditions where disappearance can occur without pattern or intention, requiring eventual resolution through persistent, disciplined, and unsensational forensic review. The concluding stage of forensic documentation did not seek to add emotional resolve, but instead to finalize the technical chain, ensuring that Michelle Alvarez's disappearance and subsequent identification remained preserved in precise archival language. In the winter of 2024, El Paso County's Records and Property Division conducted a final audit of all solved cold cases exceeding 30 years in age. Michelle's file, maintained across 3 separate storage periods, was transferred to climate-controlled shelving with updated digital indexing. Her case number, once logged in handwritten ink across manila folders, now exists in stable metadata, cross-referenced by location corridor, environmental classification, and holiday season disappearance. The purpose of such cataloging is not merely organizational but forensic, allowing future analysts to understand how environmental disappearance interacts with technological evolution and jurisdictional limitations. The desert corridor north of El Paso remains largely undeveloped, though highway expansions and occasional commercial staging zones alter its complexion. Yet the region where Michelle spent her final hours maintains its characteristic austerity. Even now, winter winds sweep across gypsum fields, carrying particulate identical to what was found embedded decades earlier in her vehicle's carpet fibers. Terrain, like memory, shifts but does not dissolve. Through aerial winter photography conducted in December 2023, forensic geographers observed lingering differences in sediment coloration, marking former industrial staging paths invisible at ground level. These faint signatures verified that the equipment yard used during the pipeline project, though dismantled before the early 1990s, left mineral imprints that guided excavation coordinates when the Locket was finally recovered. Michelle's parents, now elderly, requested a final in-person briefing in January 2024. They did not seek revised conclusions. Rather, they wanted assurance that no secondary suspect, no alternate explanation, and no unreconciled environmental ambiguity remained. Cold case supervisors provided a straightforward affirmation. All trace evidence, including metal particulate on the chain clasp, brake dust correlation with company vehicle logs, and soil composition alignment, confirmed that the maintenance driver's access zone and timeline constituted the singular nexus point. El Paso County declared the case solved, fully adjudicated by physical evidence and supported by contemporaneous industrial records. The procedural language required no supplementary narrative, only the confirmation that the chain of custody remained unbroken and the legal determination final. Such closure rarely arrives with the clarity demanded by television dramatization. Instead, it manifests through paperwork, authenticated signatures, time-stamped registry entries, notarized environmental forensic summaries. Michelle's file now joins a category rarely discussed publicly: cases solved not through confession, eyewitness testimony, or sudden discovery, but through incremental accumulation of sedimentary truth. Each winter erosion cycle contributed to eventual resurfacing, not by intention but by geography. Her remains, once displaced beyond search grid coordinates, emerged only when wind and time reached alignment. In desert regions, forensic recovery often depends on environmental cooperation, not investigative force. With final confirmation secured, the Alvarez family transitioned into a form of quiet aftermath characterizing many long-delayed closures. They continued to observe December rituals with both continuity and restraint. Light displays were modest, consisting of a single candle in the front window rather than full seasonal illumination. Church attendance resumed without ceremonial mention, and the community respected their wish for unpublicized remembrance. While some cold case families request memorial benches, scholarship funds, or courthouse plaques, the Alvarezes declined all commemorative proposals. Their priority was not legacy but completion, the ability to move through winter months without procedural expectation. The El Paso County legal record marks the case as resolved in the fourth quarter of 2008, acknowledging that formal closure occurred 16 years earlier than familial emotional settlement. This distinction is critical in archival documentation. Legal resolution and lived reconciliation do not synchronize. The state recognizes closure when evidence is conclusive. Families recognize closure when absence no longer requires explanation. For Michelle's parents, this alignment emerged only after the 2024 briefing, when the final audit confirmed no outstanding investigative leads or theoretical contingencies. Scholars studying holiday season disappearances in the American Southwest now utilize Michelle's case to illustrate the interplay between calendar cycles and forensic timing. December, a month defined by reduced staffing, increased travel, and altered law enforcement response rhythms, presents unique investigative challenges. When disappearance intersects with high desert geography, these challenges multiply. Search teams face early nightfall, freezing nocturnal temperatures, and rapid surface hardening, conditions that can erase or mislead physical clues. Michelle's investigation embodies these dynamics in complete form, demonstrating how absence during Christmas season can become prolonged without negligence or delay. No public monument marks the service road where her Oldsmobile was found. The ditch where the beige vehicle angled downward has long since been regraded, eliminating the visual indentation noted by officers in December 1988. Modern drivers pass the site unaware of its forensic weight. Traffic lines, widened shoulders, and utility expansions overlay once isolated segments. The Oldsmobile itself, after exhaustive evidence extraction, was eventually transferred to scrap under judicial authorization, its metal repurposed without ceremony. Vehicles, unlike remains or personal items, do not enter long-term custodial preservation unless evidentiary need persists. By the time Michelle's case reached final resolution, the car had served its purpose as silent witness. The jewelry, however, remained stored. The locket, stripped of its chain but still bearing faint initials, resides in an archival mount within the forensic vault, cataloged under restricted access material due to identification relevance. It is not displayed, photographed for public release, or held in museum context. It remains a private artifact of a private loss, interpreted only by those whose work requires engagement with sediment-based disappearance. In December 2023, an environmental archivist commented, not publicly but in internal report notes, that the locket represented the rare intersection of environmental endurance and emotional identification. Metal that survives desert abrasion becomes testimony long after human memory dims. The broader implications of Michelle's case influence search strategy design across the Southwest. Modern field teams now employ subsurface scanners, soil density radars, and high-resolution LiDAR mapping to detect burial zones, even when winter winds have altered topographical facade. These tools emerged not because of her case alone, but because a generation of unsolved disappearances, including hers, demonstrated how aeolian drift can obstruct early-stage recovery. Investigators entering terrain north of El Paso during December exercises now adjust grid schematics to accommodate wind direction forecasts, sediment depth shifts, and historic industrial site overlays. In the absence of public narrative, Michelle's story occupies a space of factual solemnity. It is referenced in academic journals, forensic symposiums, and environmental disappearance case studies. No scripted dramatization, no documentary reenactments, no seasonal true crime countdowns accompany her file. This absence is intentional. The family declined participation in media retellings, and the county enforces confidentiality boundaries aligned with that choice. Michelle's life, though interrupted during a period associated with celebration and communal gathering, remains chronicled through material record rather than broadcast narration. The winter quiet of El Paso continues its perennial rhythm, desert wind traversing long corridors, distant vehicular hum along I-10, soft illumination from adobe homes preparing for Christmas Eve. Within this landscape, solved cases like Michelle's occupy no physical footprint. Their legacy resides in the procedural pages of courthouse archives, in sealed evidence drawers, and in the practiced recollection of forensic specialists who study desert endurance. Thus, the resolution of Michelle Alvarez's disappearance is not a narrative of spectacle, but of method, endurance, and topographical truth. The locket found beneath shifting dunes, the particulate embedded in an abandoned car, the vehicle logs of a seasonal worker, and the decades of environmental cycles together formed the quiet architecture of closure. The family, now stepping into each December with the knowledge that uncertainty no longer inhabits their home, continues forward without ceremony. An officially solved cold case does not return the past, it merely restores the final line of record. In that restoration, winter in El Paso, with its muted sky and long horizons of pale dust, remains as it always has, indifferent, expansive, and ultimately revealing only what time and terrain allow.